Hi everyone, this is Lars Wallin with yet another screencast. This time I have the great pleasure to introduce a preview of the new version of Simplex Controller, which is a very nice handy tool for routing requests. This version adds something that I think many people have longed for, and that is full support for REST, which stands for Representational State Transfer. A very popular way of communicating with APIs nowadays. After installing, I got a lot of nice things. I have a bunch of chunks, which you can see are named routing table, and some more specifics after that. And we have a bunch of snippets, which the most important of these is of course the Simplex Controller snippets. And we also have something to kickstart the whole thing when the request comes in, and that's a plugin also called Simplex Controller. What you need to do after you installed the controller is that you need to go to this routing table, which is called REST. This is the default that I've set up with this demo that you can download. And I need to add modx test to my routing table. I will explain more about the routing table in just a second. So, as you can see here, we have a routing constraint first of all in the routing table, and that is an instruction for the controller to say which the initial routing constraint is supposed to be, and path is actually the path field in the request object sent to the server. And path is whatever follows the domain name, you know, the www/, and then comes the path. So in my case, it's, as you can see, it's modx test, mod API, mod chunk. So, and after we've set the routing constraints, we have a bunch of defaults stuff which is always in the routing table. It's a list of contexts, the first of which is web, and then you have manager down here. These are just the keys used by modx to specify contexts. Anyway, so manager really doesn't need to be here because we don't have any instructions for managers. So I really, if I wanted to, I could just delete that. But anyway, after we have specified that we want to do stuff for the web context, next comes what I call the constraint. And the constraint is basically the initial route that you want to make. And in this case, we want to constrain our routing to paths. And as I mentioned before, a path is whatever comes after your domain name. So this is the constraint, and this little sign here, a token, is a token that points to a value. So I say when path is set to this particular string or value, we should check for a method. This is what I call a rule, and this is what I call a condition. So when the first we have the constraint, the rule, and the condition. And when the method is get, I want to run the snippet mod API.modchunk.get. So if this works as it should, we should now be able to go to modx test, mod API, and you can see that I've done this before because it shows up here. And when I do this, the routing should execute the snippet in question. Voila. Getting chunk. Well, not really, because it's only a dummy snippet. Okay, let's see if we actually got the results we expected. If I check what happens in the mod API modchunk.get, you can see getting chunk. Well, not really. And then we simply lay down and die. Very dramatic. But okay, that was the REST, an example of how to set up REST routes. The nice thing about the controller is that it's not only meant for routing specifically for REST, you know, where you map a resource to a URI. The controller can route on any part of the request message. And to show you this, I will take this, for example, which is query.id. You can name these routing tables to anything you like. They're just strings. So in this case, you can see that the constraint is that I want to use the query string and only the ID, which is passed with a query string. And as you can see, again, we're using the web context, and we're saying when query string ID is 1, we check the method. If the method is get, we run this snippet. This is a star, as you can see, and that's the default token. And if method is anything but get, it will run the default snippet. So to make this work, we go to the controller and we simply go to properties. We unlock the default properties and we say that the routing table is not REST, but query.id. Good stuff. And Firefox has obvious problems displaying these buttons. Strange. Anyway, now we're supposed to be able to route on ID. So, and the nice thing here is that we've basically overridden everything when it comes to URIs, URLs and stuff. We're saying any URL, any resource with ID 1. I think it was 1, right? Let's check just to be certain. Let's see. Yep. If it's ID 1 and method is get, we should run the get. So let's see what happens. Yep. It was. Let's do this instead. Let's do add instead, just to make sure that something really happened. So what we've done now is we've changed the routing table to execute modchunk.add instead. Yeah, adding chunk, voila. So what happened here was that we routed on ID 1 and method and get. But what happens when we go to ID number 2? Nothing, because as you can see here, there's nothing, no default for this particular expression. You know, if query ID is not 1, nothing happens. The same would be if method would be, if we didn't have any method in the request. If the request didn't have a method field, the same thing would happen. It would automatically fail. If we didn't add a default handler here instead. We're not going to do that now, but I will go more into that in another tutorial, or I will write something hopefully. We can also do this, that we could duplicate this, for example. See, voila, and we can say when the ID is 2, we should do delete. Deleting chunk. Well, not really. Anyway, so these are two versions. You can also do something which I am going to use very soon when getting routing on different kind of web service requests, and that is routing by header. So the routing constraint in this case is header, a header field, and I say that first of all, this is a bit different, as you can see. We don't specify any specific field here. We just say whenever there's a header, go down and check what kind of rules we have for headers in general. So that's the constraint. And here we say we want to check out content types, and I say here that if it's text XML, it should run the defaults. As you can see here, we don't have any in the request. We don't have any content type, but we could use connection, for example. Pretty pointless, but just for just to show off this feature. So I go ahead and oops, I still want to route on header, but instead of content type, I want to use connection. And when the connection is keep alive, I want to run the default snippets. Default instruction from one chunk. So, and this way we can actually route on anything. You know, you could route on a cookie, for example. What you do is you just simply say cookie as the constraints, and say cookie here as well. And then again, and my cookie. And depending on the value of the cookie, you can do stuff. If it's not set, for example, you can do something. If it's set, you can do something. Very handy. What you have here is basically a super duper generic routing server, which you can use to basically very simply, first of all, act upon any request that is made from a client. You can actually route on ports, protocol, anything which is specified in the request. So, and I will explain more on that of that later. I think this video has probably gone on long enough. So I hope you found this interesting. I personally just think it's pretty awesome. So I hope you think so as well. Anyway, talk to you soon, everybody, and ciao for now.